going on, Turbo Speedsters? It's your boy, Coach Chris Turbo, aka Mr. Turbo Speed, aka Coach Chris Burris. And I wanted to thank you all for stopping by my channel. So if you're new, go ahead and hit that subscribe button, and then do your coach a favor and turbo smack that like button and power punch that notification bell so that you can take advantage of all my coaching, training, speed enhancing videos here on YouTube. So today's video, we're going to be talking about training for sprinter speed in the weight room. Let's get into it. Alright, Turbo Speedsters, so today's video we're going to be talking about weight room program design. Specifically, we're going to be talking about strength training for sprinters. We're going to be looking at weight room specific needs, how to structure your sessions, goals of each session. We're going to talk about techniques, tactics, and procedures. Then we'll take a look at what we do here at Team Turbo Speed so that we maximize weight room performance and so that we are running faster times out on the track. So the purpose of this video is to provide key concepts in regarding training for sprinter speed via the weight room. The scope of this video will include proper program design and periodization techniques for training for speed in the weight room. And the audience for this video is intended for coaches, athletes, parents, or anyone who wants to improve their strength, conditioning, and sports performance, as well as increase sprinter speed running faster on the track. Alright, so let's go ahead and get into this. Training for sprinter speed via the weight room, okay? We're going to take a look at the strength training for speed. This is the top 3 things that we do when we are program designing for weight room, specifically for sprinter speed increases, okay? So the first thing is you want to identify the athletic need. The second thing you want to do is you want to set the training goal that meets the athletic need. And then we take a look at the specific TTP, the techniques, tactics, and procedures that you can be implementing into your sprinter speed training programs in the weight room, okay? So let's deep dive into this and let's take a deep look into kind of what all 3 of these things mean. Alright, so the first thing we're going to take a look at here is going to be identifying athletic needs, okay? So first and foremost, as a coach, as a parent, or as an athlete, you need to be assessing your strengths and your weaknesses. You need to find out what you're good at as a sprinter and what you're bad at as a sprinter, and work on those and build programs around those weaknesses so that you become strong in all areas. So how do you do that? Here at Team Turbo Speed, we use assessments. Okay, so the number 1 style of assessment that we're going to use, and so we can build a baseline in the weight room, is going to be our absolute strength test. Okay, we know that the stronger an athlete is, the more force they can apply back into the ground and propel themselves vertically and have horizontal thrust so that they can run faster. All right. The other types of assessments we do are speed tests, muscular endurance, and muscular stamina tests. Okay. So specifically what that looks like is for speed testing. Before you get into the weight room, as you're starting to build your program, you are going to start compiling the data into a spreadsheet. So get yourself a spreadsheet, use Excel, use numbers on Apple or Google Docs or whatever you happen to do, and you're just going to write down the different types of speed tests, and those are the 20-meter dash, the 40-meter dash, the 60-meter dash, the 100-meter dash, the 200-meter dash, all the way up to about the 800-meter dash. And then if you're a football player, you can switch the meters to yards. But you want to do from 20 to about 200 meters of testing. So those are going to be full on 100% testing methodology that you're going to do. Okay, so you're going to have your athletes run those 100% with full recovery. All right. The other test you want to be working on is a flying 20 meter and a flying 40 meter. This is going to test our basically our muscular stamina and max velocity. All right. So once you have those tests, that gives you a baseline, a very start. Like, hey, Johnny, you ran a 11.5 in the 100 meters, and we're going to test that again in 4 weeks, test it again in 10 weeks, test it again in 12 weeks, so that you know and you can actively progress and track their progressions in a positive way, and or see if there's any negative effects of your weight training program. So it's a way for you as a coach or a parent or even as an athlete to assess your programming skills. So the first test you're going to do is your speed test, right? The second test you're going to do is your absolute strength test. So this is your standard 1 rep max test, where you're going to see what your 1 rep max is within the weight room on conventional lifts and Olympic lifts. Okay, so conventional lifts being the deadlift, the bench press, the squat. I like the leg press as well, and those are going to be just your conventional lifts that you're going to test your 1 rep max. Figure out what your 1 rep max is, and that way when you're building your actual programs, you can use percentage basis to determine the load depending on the training phase that you're in, right? So do your speed test, do your absolute strength test. The last two things, the muscular endurance and muscular stamina test that you can do. You can do a body weight squat for leg endurance and leg stamina, so you can test how many squats someone can do, air squats or prisoner squats or bodyweight squats, your athletes can do without taking into consideration how fast they're doing. Just say, hey, Susie, I want you to do as many squats as you can do until you can't do anymore. So that will test endurance. Testing stamina will be, hey, I want to see how many squats you can do as fast as you can do them as possible for 2 minutes, for a minute. Or you can vary it and say, hey, Susie, I want you to do as many squats as you can do as fast as possible until you can't do them as fast anymore. And that will test stamina. A very distinct difference between endurance and stamina. Stamina being the short term, how much energy can you expend in a short amount of time to the max effort, and endurance being how long can you just do a particular exercise. And to put that into perspective, stamina might be just sprinting. How hard can you sprint a 100-meter dash without slowing down? Or endurance, how many 100-meter dashes can you do regardless of how fast you're going? Endurance. Moving on. So the next thing, setting training goals. Okay, so now you've done your assessment. You know what the strengths and the weaknesses of your athlete are, right? So you can tell that, hey, if Johnny has a bench press of 225 and a deadlift of 135, you know that he is weak in the core and weak in the legs, weak in the hips, right? So you know the weaknesses and you know the strengths, okay? So now you need to build your actual programming style, right? You want to make sure that your training goal is aligned within a macro, a meso, a micro, and a nano level. If you have seen my programming design video, great, so you know what I'm talking about. If you have not, I'll link it down below, so take a look at that. It goes into the periodization for sprinters that is most effective, and the 2 types of styles would be the 52-week style and the phases style, depending on your flavor and kind of what you want to do as a coach or an athlete. But you want to make sure that your training goals are meeting the requirements of aligning with your training phase, and within those training phases, you are attacking your weaknesses and strengthening your weaknesses so that you become a better overall athlete, a better, well-rounded athlete, and you as a coach are pushing your athletes towards the path of success as sprinters. So the next thing we want to talk about is TTPs, right? Techniques, tactics, and procedures. This is the bread and butter of what we really need to know if we're programming specifically for the weight room, okay? So you want to figure out the type of exercises that you need to be incorporating, all right? So you have conventional lifts, deadlifts, bench press, squats, any type of compound movements, okay? Most of your machines are going to be conventional lifts, right? Then you have your Olympic lifts. These are all the Olympic lifts: snatches, cleans, hangs, all that stuff. Then you have your plyometrics. Then you have a different methodology called contrast training and complex training, all right? And then you have the different movements within these different exercises: the eccentric movement, the concentric movement, and the isometric movement. Okay. The next thing you want to take into consideration is your frequency. All right. How often are you lifting? Okay. How often are you in the weight room? Which is 100% going to depend on your training phase and the training goal at the time within the different phases. But take into consideration your frequency. Take into consideration the intensity. And by intensity, I mean the actual load prescription that you're prescribing inside of your weight room program during your training phases. All right. So since you tested your absolute strength via 1 rep maxes, your intensity really is going to be based off that. So you might do deadlift at 85% of your 1 rep max 1 week, and then go to an explosive phase where you might do the intensity of your deadlift is going to be, at 60, and it's a plyometric deadlift, right? So taking into consideration your training phase with intensity, one of the biggest things you want to take into consideration is your recovery. Okay, so everything you do in the weight room should be energy system dependent, right? As a sprinter, you're going to be pretty much working your anaerobic and fast glycolytic systems. You're not going to really touch your oxidative systems unless you're pushing into the 400 meter and the 800 meter dashes. So consider your recovery whenever you're programming, and say that, hey, if we're in a pretty intense cycle where we're lifting at really high intensity, so like 85% and above, you potentially maybe want to be using 2 to 5 minutes, 2 to 6 minutes of recovery, because you're working the anaerobic system, which takes at least 2 to 5 or 2 to 6 minutes, depending on the athlete, to recharge itself to become at least 90 to 95 to 100% back recouped during recovery. So take into consideration your recovery. Now, the biggest thing you want to be worried about while programming for sprinter speed in the weight room is exercise order, the order of exercises, okay? So, rule of thumb. When you're lifting weights in the weight room, you want to start off with multi-joint movements first, then move into the single joint movements. Okay, so you're going to start off with your conventional lifts or your Olympic lifts or your plyometrics first, and then get into your single joint movements such as machines, bicep curls, lateral raises, anything with dumbbells, any of the machines, leg curls, leg extensions, calf raises on machines, stuff like that. Always start off with multi-joint movements. This is important because when you're working multi-joints and you have heavy lifting, or you're doing volume training and you have a lot to be lifting, you need to be able to do so. So doing a leg curl, leg extension before you do a deadlift is not conducive to the energy expenditures that you're trying to produce in the weight room. For example, if you're lifting for power and you're doing 5x5 deadlifts at 87% and you run 1 rep max, and then you have leg curls and leg extensions, you're not going to do leg curls and leg extensions for 3 sets of 8 first. You're going to do the deadlifts first because it requires the most energy first, and then you can incorporate more rest time as you get into the auxiliary lifts of the machines and isolating one muscle over multi-joints. Okay? So that's pretty much the approach and everything that you really need to start programming in a nutshell. Identify what your athletes need, identify the strengths, identify their weaknesses, build a baseline through assessment, speed test, muscular endurance test, muscular stamina test, and absolute strength via 1 rep max, okay? So build that baseline before you start them in the weight room. So then you set a protocol and say, we're gonna test every 4 weeks, so once a month you're gonna test the same tests, okay? Then you wanna make sure that your assessments that you're building and the frequency and all these tactics and procedures are going to align with your training goal. So if your athlete's training goal is to get bigger because they're too tiny, they're not in the right ratio of weight to height and strength, make sure you align that in your training goals in the macro level, the meso level, the micro level, and the nano level, essentially the yearly, monthly, weekly, and daily, and make sure that all aligns. Then you start plugging in all of this stuff here inside your program. So you're going to lift frequency Monday, Wednesday, Friday. You're going to do conventional lifts on Monday, Olympic lifts on Wednesday, plyometric session on Friday. You're going to keep the intensity between 60% and 85%. You're going to use your recovery 2 to 5 minutes because we want to be working the energy systems. And you're going to do different types of training techniques such as contrast training or complex training. And you're going to emphasize eccentric, concentric, or isometric movements within your exercise selection. And you're going to be doing multi-joint movements first, followed by auxiliary lifts of single joint movements exercises after that. All right, Turbo Speedsters, so the last thing I want to leave you guys with is a value bomb. And this is how we program here at Team Turbo Speed, okay? We have 5 different things that we take into consideration while building weight room programs for increasing sprinter speed, all right? So the first thing that we take a look at is that everything that we do in the weight room is sport-specific movements. You can cater every exercise from conventional lifts and the way that you implement those inside your training program to mimic sport-specific movements. All right, so for example, sprinting. If I wanted to do a deadlift, I can do a conventional deadlift followed up by jump lunges or a cycle lunge or a power quick step bound, and that'll be very sport-specific, working on your biomotor skills, so that you can ultimately, when you get back on the track, translate the weight room power and strength that you develop into a sport-specific manner, such as running, such as sprinting, or jumping, or throwing. Okay, so if you want to be like us and you want to train like the Team Turbo Speed team, program for sport-specific movements in your weight room, in the weight room. Okay. The next thing that we take into consideration is training goal. We're heavy on training goal. All right, so assessments are key. If you don't know what you're weak at, you can't go down a path that's going to make you a better athlete. So take into consideration the training goal and why you're in the weight room. Why are you doing what you're doing? Why is it important for you as an athlete or as a coach or as a parent to make your athlete or yourself do the movements in the weight room and why you're doing that? Okay. The third big thing that we work on is rate of force development. To run faster, you need to be able to apply as much force as possible in the shortest amount of time back into the ground and propel yourself vertically and horizontally to run faster, hit max velocity, and train that in stamina so that you can hold your sprint for as long as possible, right? So how do you do that? In the weight room, you want to do things like plyometrics. You want to do things like Olympic lifts. You want to do things like complex or contrast training. You want to work on this phenomenon called post-activation potentiation, which is essentially going to shock the nervous system over and over again, but through repeated sessions and through repeated actions, so you can run faster and generate more motor neuron connections in your brain and fire more muscle fibers because you're training for sport-specific movements in the weight room, and you're keeping your frequency very consistent. All right, so rate of force development, how fast your body can activate up here and fire the motor neurons to your muscles, and so that you can just explode from every step that you're sprinting, from the blocks through your drive phase, through your transition into your max velocity phase, into your deceleration phase, and your finish, right? The last two things here we want to talk about and we target in our Team Turbo Speed methodology here in the weight room is strength speed, okay? Strength speed is your body's ability to move heavy loads as fast as possible. So you accomplish this through Olympic lifts, anywhere from 85% of your 1 rep max, so anywhere from about 70% to 87% of your 1 rep max, doing Olympic lifts as fast as possible. Earlier in the video, I talked the most beneficial Olympic lifts you should be doing are your hang cleans from knees and hang cleaning, and power cleans from the floor. Those are going to be your number one biggest bang for your buck, especially when it comes to rate of force development. All right, so that's the big key number 4. The last thing we really focus on is speed strength. Okay, speed strength is your body's ability to move its own natural body weight as fast as possible. And you can actually load this with dumbbells or weighted vests to help you with that vertical propulsion and that horizontal thrust. And that'll ultimately make you run faster down when you get back on the track. So speed, strength, you accomplish this through plyometrics. You can use dumbbells and or weighted vests, and you want to keep the loads anywhere between 10% of your 1 rep max to about 40% of your 1 rep max. So that does it. Team Turbo Speed method here of periodization and sprint training programming for the weight room. Okay, I've given you guys the golden goose, the nuggets, so that you can program your own speed training programs for your kids, for your athletes, or for yourself. If you just follow these very basic but very applicable methodologies for training for sprinter speed in the weight room, I promise you, you're going to get faster, you're going to get stronger, you become a more well-rounded athlete, and at the end of the day, you're going to be winning and running fast times, and you're going to be championship teams, and you're going to be doing all these great things on the track. Alright, so if you guys have any questions, go ahead and comment down below, and if you're new, go ahead and subscribe. Do your coach a favor and turbo smack that like button and power punch that notification bell so that you can take advantage of all my coaching, training, speed enhancing videos here on YouTube. And like I always say, Turbo Speedsters, don't go fast, go turbo.